I am so honored to get to talk with you today. I know sharing my mental health story, sharing your mental health story is so important and such an important thing, especially at this time. But I do have to put it out there that I am personally a big fan of you. And 18 to Life is one of my favorite songs. So I'm a big fan, both musically as well as getting to have this conversation. So thank you so much for joining today.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for taking the time. I'm humbled by your kind words.
No, thank you so much. So, just in case people I'm sure know who you are, they probably know a little bit less about who I am. My name's Kendall Toole. I am a Peloton cycling instructor. I'm also a big mental health advocate. I'm proud to be an ambassador for NAMI and to be a part of these conversations and help also, kind of change the way that we look at what mental health is and be a face for it as someone who deals with it myself. So, I'm really honored to get to do this. If you want to kind of give a little intro, Snake, for yourself, that'd be awesome too.
Well, I mean, I started Skid Row in 1986, but I've been dealing with mental health and mental illness issues since my early teens. And so throughout the ups and downs of my professional career and my personal life, it's been something that's been riding, right next to me, on my shoulder the whole time, and still does to this day. It's not something that just boom goes away. So I always felt that music was my purest form of expression. And now I'm happy to see that we're having more of a dialogue regarding mental health and mental illness. And so not only am I able to express myself through music, but I'm able to express what I go through and what I've gone through verbally, and as you do. And hopefully it offers some, not only insight, but maybe some solace from people who are struggling with the same issues that we struggle with. And I'm just thankful that we're able to do something like this, because this didn't exist 5, 10 years ago, this openness
Mhm.
regarding mental health and mental illness. So I'm proud to be a part of this, to say the least.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's you bring up a great point, and we can kind of jump in from here, but these conversations are so new, and ironically, they've been affecting so many people for so long. Mental health and that mental health journey and mental illness is not a new concept, but the way in which we're able to talk about it so openly and beautifully get to support each other now and kind of reveal these parts of ourselves is more of a newer thing to our community and our society. So why do you think that is, first and foremost, kind of jumping into it? Why do you think we're able to do that now?
I think that it got to the tipping point where silence equaled loneliness, to the point where it just wasn't acceptable anymore. It was, for a while, it was demeaning to be struggling with these issues. It ruined your self-esteem. It made you feel weak. And also, we were raised in a culture, especially I was, you're much younger than me, but I was raised in a culture that was predicated on the fact that you solved those mental issues on your own. You didn't speak about it.
Uh-huh.
There wasn't help out there for you. You were sit there and you were uh, taught that there was electroshock therapy and
Yeah.
things of that
And
nature.
lobotomies and these things that are so villainous in so many ways. And even the concept of going to a mental institution, it being called the loony bin, all of these other factors, it was so dredged in this just negative, weak, it was really totally the opposite of what mental health is, which is really self-exploration, self-understanding in a way, and I think a pathway into really tapping into your true purpose and your true power. But it was so looked at opposite. That's fascinating. That's such a good
Well,
point.
for how many years was it depicted in horror movies?
That's
Uh,
so true. And like straight jackets and things of that nature where people were thought,
just
even the masks, yeah.
horrific experiences. Like, if you were suffering from mental illness and mental health issues, you were considered a monster, something to be thrown off into the corner and forgotten about, because no one took the time. The medical community didn't take the time and the effort to research this as a physiological disorder, I said this to you before, no one wanted to have a conversation about crazy Uncle Snake, Um,
Yeah,
so
totally.
we were taught to not speak about this, or the ramifications were asylums, or insane
So
asylums.
severe. Yeah. And they changed the perception of, they took away your humanity in many ways. Like I think the best way to really eradicate someone's humanity is to call them crazy. I hate the word crazy because
Yeah.
it's so demeaning to that person, because you take away their ability to think for themselves, to express the way they feel, because they're different, or they might show up in the world a little bit, I think, more authentically than a lot of us around us, right? They're dissonant from the status quo, but because of that, that's what makes them more human. And so it's odd that for so long mental health has been placed in such a villainous almost perception. And in fact, it always comes down to, and I know I felt this when I was going through my mental health struggles, continue to, of course, to this day. I always felt as if I was wearing a mask. Like I would
Yeah.
put on a facade and put on this face. And when I felt the shame about my mental health before I was welcome to open up about my own anxiety and depression, I always felt like I was having to hide the monster inside me because of the societal effect of what, how mental illness was looked at. Like I don't know if you had a similar experience as well.
Oh my gosh, the perception of what mental illness was for so long, it terrified me to
Yeah.
expose myself in any sort of public forum, because being in a band and being a quote unquote public figure or whatever, and being out there, the last thing you want to do, or the last thing I wanted to do, was do anything that would diminish the popularity of the band, or have the band looked at in a negative way, because I was going through a depression, anxiety, panic attacks, all these things that were overwhelming. And so, and just like yourself, I put on a brave face, and I hid it forever up until my mid 30s.
Wow. And that's
Yeah.
the much success of the band too. Like even just knowing some of the biggest songs that came out for you guys. And I brought up at the beginning 18 to Life, because to me that was such an incredible song, because it had so metal music, like up until that point, felt very like party and loud and rah. And 18 to Life had so much story behind it. And I remember listening to it and really being drawn to metal music and rock music, especially when I was going through my depression and anxiety predominantly in high school and college, and feeling heard and feeling seen in that music, especially 18 to Life, because I felt afflicted with what was going on in me internally. And hearing that song was so much about the affliction and the struggle and the challenge. So I'm curious if your mental health experience came into your music, how they married with each other, how they helped each other.
Without a doubt, it's one of the biggest influences on how I write with my partner in the band, Rachel Boland.
Yeah.
We draw upon everything that's within us, because that's the reason why we started in the first place, was because it was the only way that we figured out how to express ourselves. um, as as youngsters, we couldn't express ourselves verbally. With me, I realized that I was going through something very early on. Um, Abandonment issues, uh, depressive issues, and things that I did not feel comfortable speaking up about or out about. So I just internalized it and refused to verbalize it, thus leading the way to me discovering the guitar and finding out that through the sound of this guitar, and through whatever melodies and lyrics I might have in my head, this was helping me to express in one way or another things that were going on inside of me that I couldn't express otherwise. And it's still the case to this day.
Wow. And so
So whether
do you still feel that connection when you're writing or performing music, that like I guess the best way to put it, I've had that experience in more of a physical sense. Like I took up boxing. I had a mentor who I think noticed what was going on with me, and getting into the ring and putting gloves on and fighting was the only time I could get out of my own head, because
Yeah.
frankly, if I was in my head, I'd get hit. So it was a physical representation of how I felt internally. And it was that self-expression. So even to this day, is that something that you touch back on to keep you going?
Without a doubt, and
Yeah.
I think it's just a natural way that things work within me as far as my creative process goes. I think it's really strange because writing, like writing has to do with whether the window inside of you is open or closed. Sometimes it's closed,
Huh.
and
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't. What needs to get through doesn't get through. It's almost kind of like being stuck for words,
Yeah.
um, not being able to articulate yourself properly.
Yeah, and that's almost how sometimes mental, or at least for me, my anxiety has felt. Like
Oh
there's
my
so
gosh.
many things I want to do, and I just feel it literally feels like there's someone with ropes on every arm that's just like stopping me from moving forward. And I know that's the exact direction I want to go. And it's so frustrating. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it's and it's really special when that window is open
Yeah.
and all this stuff is coming out of you, but it's definitely difficult for that window to be open all the time. And often what happens is that, and I'm just learning this now, but that window gets closed, and if it gets closed for a long period of time, this negativity just builds up within you.
Mhm.
And you have no way of releasing it if that portal, if you will, if that door, that window is closed. And so you come up with other ways to deal with that negativity. A lot of times it's us pushing it down, as we spoke of before, to a dark place that hopefully you don't have to pay attention to it until someday you're going to have to.
And the levee breaks. And that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like I think so much of my own mental health experience and journey was in dealing with the anxiety and the depression. For me, it manifested early as OCD, and I was very particular, and I had routines, and really felt that if I didn't partake in these rituals, the world as I knew it, the world that I wanted, would fall apart. I thought I would be punished for something because of how different and weird I was, but I couldn't share it. And then it all escalated. That kept growing. I never really knew until come college, it all piled up to the point that when that depression hit, and when really I was at a brink and contemplating suicide and things of that nature, it just burst. And it was fascinating though, because in that burst was also this weird freedom. And it took a long time. It took therapy, but it also, by allowing that portal to open, and by now learning to, still working on the fact of allowing those negative challenges, acknowledging them, working through them rather than pushing them away, I've gotten to a place where it's almost allowed me more creative freedom and more presence within myself. But it definitely is a process. So I'm curious how that's,
Without a doubt.
yeah.
I'm happy that you had a sense of freedom when everything kind of came to uh, that boiling point. For me, it was sort of the opposite. I had done such a good job of suppressing this for so long.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting too is success has a way of masking all of that as well, because you're living on a high,
Yeah.
of riding this wave of success, and you're rationalizing with yourself, like, what have I got to be depressed about?
Yes. I find myself doing that now. In
Right.
fact, I find myself doing that as my career has grown, and the privilege of getting to reach more people has grown and connect with them. There's moments when I'm like, okay, get over it. You're fine. Look at how many great things you have. You can't possibly. And that's also such a slippery slope, because you get to a point where you don't acknowledge what your real self needs versus what the external almost validation, or also the external joy comes. It's odd. It's an odd relationship. It's that one's a new one for me.
Well, yeah, but for me, it was it gave me the ability to push everything aside and not focus on myself. I became like the band therapist because um, I completely took all of my stuff. I wanted to take the onus off of me as much as possible, which is very strange because I'm sitting there performing in front of audiences every night where I'm relishing in that back and forth between the audience and the band.
Yeah.
And it's a special form of communication and bonding, a community, if you will. It's
Uh-huh.
communal.
Yep.
And so to get off that stage and not want to deal with the the quietness,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden this stuff pops up, I would just keep suppressing it and suppressing it and suppressing it until, like what happened with you, it just all came to a head and exploded. But my sense wasn't freedom anymore. Now it was, for me, it was like, oh boy, like this is real. Like this is very, very real. Because for so long I had told myself that it wasn't real. I had looked at it from a third person perspective. I was molested as a young boy. And so I never viewed that from my own perspective as it happened to me. My defense mechanism, exactly.
Exactly what
I
you're.
was looking through an outside perspective at it as if it was happening to somebody else. And
Well,
that's how I was able, I'm sorry?
I said, so it provided you that distance. And it's interesting when you said that you were kind of the therapist for the band, because it's so much easier when you're struggling so deeply to help others. And I've definitely, in past relationships, especially in the midst of that moment for me and that big turning point, I was trying to give everything to everybody else so that I just didn't have to deal with the pile of what I knew was within me, even subconsciously. So that's
Yeah.
interesting, that kind of separation of self between, because once you acknowledge it, you have to own that it's a part of you. It's a part of what makes you Snake, what makes me Kendall. And it's fascinating that way.
It's fascinating and it's sobering and it's scary.
Yep. Yep.
It's so scary. And that when that hit me, and I want to say I was in my mid 30s when it everything kind of just went haywire, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, I was scared to death. And then you start thinking of horrible thoughts, because the pain is excruciating. And so that led me down a path of, twice attempting suicide and being thankful that I failed. Um, but the pain was unbearable because it was so real and so physical. It was such a physiological experience.